The moment a stranger enters any room, before words form or hands extend in greeting, a verdict has already been delivered. Human eyes scan clothing, posture, the subtle signals of grooming and maintenance. Processing this information faster than conscious thought can intervene. Within 3 seconds, sometimes less, the observer has categorized the newcomer as worthy or worthless, dangerous or disposable, someone to court or someone to ignore. This split-second assessment, brutal in its efficiency and devastating in its permanence, governs more human interactions than any law ever written. The visible markers of poverty function as a kind of social leprosy, warning others to maintain distance. Worn fabric speaks of inability to replace what deteriorates. Scuffed shoes tell stories of walking when others ride. Ill-fitting garments suggest hand-me-downs or thrift store selections made from limited options rather than personal preference. These details coalesce into an image that broadcasts vulnerability as clearly as blood in water attracts sharks. The predators of human society, those who exploit weakness for gain, identify their targets through these visual cues long before any interaction begins. Consider how differently the same person might be treated based solely on attire. A man enters a bank wearing a tailored suit, and employees straighten their spines, offer chairs, speak in measured tones of respect. The same man returns the next day in workman's clothes, and suddenly he faces longer waits, sharper questions, subtle suggestions that perhaps his business might be better conducted elsewhere. His intelligence has not changed, his character remains constant, yet the treatment he receives transforms completely based on fabric and thread. The merchant classes have understood this principle for centuries. Shop owners develop an almost supernatural ability to assess purchasing power through appearance alone. Watch their eyes as customers enter. The pupils dilate slightly when spotting quality leather, narrow at the sight of synthetic materials. Voices modulate automatically, becoming either honeyed or dismissive based on these instantaneous calculations. The customer wearing designer labels receives attention before finishing their approach to the counter, while another in modest clothing might wait indefinitely, invisible despite standing directly before the staff. Historical records overflow with brilliant minds whose contributions were nearly lost because they could not master the art of presentation. Scientists whose theories later revolutionized understanding were initially dismissed because their collars were frayed. Inventors whose creations would reshape industries faced closed doors because their shoes betrayed their economic station. The content of their minds mattered less than the cut of their clothes. Meanwhile, charlatans draped in finery gained audiences with royalty, their empty words valued more highly than genius wrapped in poverty. The psychological mechanisms driving these responses run deeper than simple snobbery. Humans evolved as tribal creatures who needed to make rapid assessments about strangers to ensure survival. Is this person from a successful group or a struggling one? Do they have resources that suggest competence or lack that implies weakness? These ancient programs still execute in modern minds, translating primitive survival instincts into contemporary social judgments. The businessman who dismisses a poorly dressed applicant is running the same neural software that once helped ancestors identify which strangers might offer alliance versus those who might drain resources. The violence of this judgment lies not in physical force, but in the closing of possibilities. Doors that might have opened remain locked. Conversations that could have led to opportunities never begin. Networks that might have provided advancement exclude those who fail the appearance test. Each rejection compounds, creating cascading consequences that push the poorly presented further from success. A single day wearing inadequate clothing to important meetings can redirect an entire life trajectory, not because of any failure of character or competence, but simply because fabric failed to convey the correct message. The cruelty extends into intimate spaces as well. Dating markets operate on these same principles, perhaps even more ruthlessly. Online profiles featuring expensive backdrops and designer clothing receive exponentially more attention than those showing modest circumstances. First dates become evaluations, not of compatibility, but of resource display. The suitor who arrives in an older vehicle, wearing clothes that suggest careful budgeting rather than casual spending, faces an uphill battle regardless of their actual worth as a partner. Love, that supposedly pure emotion, finds itself filtered through assessments of material presentation. In professional environments, the penalty for appearing poor compounds with devastating efficiency. The employee who cannot afford the unofficial uniform of their workplace, who stands out for wearing the same outfit too frequently, or whose accessories betray their economic reality, faces subtle but persistent discrimination. Promotions pass them by, not through official policy, but through unconscious bias. Colleagues assume less competence, assign less important tasks, include them less frequently in critical discussions. The appearance of poverty becomes a glass ceiling, invisible but impermeable. This system perpetuates itself through memory and reputation. Once someone has been categorized as poor, that classification adheres like a stain that no amount of later success can fully cleanse. Coworkers remember the shabby coat worn during the first winter. Acquaintances recall the embarrassment of a credit card declined at a group dinner. These memories color every subsequent interaction, creating a lens through which all future actions are interpreted. Success becomes luck, achievement becomes overreach, and the individual remains forever marked by their lowest economic point. The mathematics of this are simple but harsh. A person allocating funds between food and clothing faces an impossible choice. Eat adequately but appear poor, risking professional and social exclusion, or maintain appearances while experiencing private hunger. This is not vanity, but calculation. The job interview that requires a suit might lead to income that resolves both problems, but without the suit, the interview becomes meaningless. The networking event that could provide crucial connections requires an entrance fee paid not just in money, but in appropriate appearance, without which attendance becomes counterproductive. The mathematics of social exclusion operate with compound interest, each instance of perceived poverty multiplying the next. A single moment of visible economic struggle creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial observation. The colleague who witnesses your card declined at lunch begins unconsciously excluding you from group dinners. The supervisor who notices your shoes held together with careful maintenance rather than replaced starts passing you over for client-facing opportunities. These small exclusions accumulate into systematic isolation from the very networks that enable economic advancement. The permanence of first impressions creates a particularly vicious trap. Psychological research demonstrates that humans weight initial encounters approximately 7 times more heavily than subsequent interactions when forming judgments. The interview suit borrowed hastily, fitting poorly, speaks louder than months of competent work that follow. The wedding attended in obviously dated formal wear echoes longer than years of friendship. These moments of visible economic strain become reference points that anchor all future assessments, dragging down perceptions regardless of later improvements. Professional environments amplify these dynamics through unwritten dress codes that function as economic barriers. The law firm that technically allows any professional attire knows that associates who appear in anything less than premium suits face subtle but real career limitations. The technology company that boasts casual culture still rewards those whose carefully curated casualness involves expensive sneakers and designer jeans. These environments create arms races of appearance where falling behind means professional death, not through termination, but through gradual irrelevance. Access to power structures depends almost entirely on appearance compatibility. Boardrooms, executive clubs, fundraising galas, political gatherings, these spaces where real decisions get made, have unspoken entrance requirements, measured in fabric quality and accessory cost. Those who appear wearing visible markers of lower economic status find themselves technically present but functionally excluded. Conversations flow around them rather than through them. Business cards are exchanged with others while they stand isolated despite being in the center of the room. The psychological burden of maintaining appearances while experiencing actual poverty creates a unique form of exhaustion. Every morning becomes a strategic calculation. Which garment shows the least wear? How can accessories distract from the age of core pieces? What combinations create the illusion of variety from limited options? This mental labor, performed before the actual workday begins, drains cognitive resources that others can dedicate to performance and advancement. The poor must work harder simply to reach the starting line that others take for granted. Memory operates with particular cruelty regarding economic status. The human mind preferentially stores and recalls information that confirms initial categorizations, a phenomenon psychologists term confirmation bias. Once someone has been classified as poor, observers unconsciously notice and remember details that reinforce this classification while overlooking evidence to the contrary. The promotion earned gets forgotten, while the patched jacket gets remembered. The successful project completed fades from memory, while the brown-bagged lunches remain vivid. Strategic investment in appearance represents not vanity, but survival calculation. The coat that costs a month of savings might enable the job that provides years of income. The professional photographs that strain the budget could open doors to opportunities that multiply their cost hundredfold. These investments carry risk. The coat might not lead to the job. The photographs might not generate opportunities, but the absence of these investments guarantees exclusion. This is not speculation, but observable pattern repeated across countless individual histories. Consider the cascading consequences of appearing poor during crucial transitions. The recent graduate who cannot afford appropriate interview attire faces immediate disadvantage against peers whose families provided wardrobes. The entrepreneur seeking investment finds that venture capitalists unconsciously assess founder quality through appearance signals. The academic presenting research discovers that audience attention correlates more strongly with presenter appearance than with content quality. Each of these moments represents a gate that appearance either opens or permanently closes. The relationship between appearance and credibility creates particular challenges for those offering expertise or leadership. The consultant whose clothes suggest economic struggle finds clients questioning their advice, regardless of its merit. A teacher whose attire betrays financial strain loses authority with both students and parents. The manager who cannot match the appearance standards of their team faces subtle undermining of their decisions. Knowledge and competence become irrelevant when packaging fails to convey prosperity. Social mobility requires breaking through appearance barriers that become more rigid as one attempts to climb. Lower economic tiers might forgive visible poverty as common circumstance. Middle tiers demand careful maintenance of respectable presentation. Upper tiers require not just quality, but specific brands, particular styles, subtle signals that cannot be faked without extensive investment. Each tier has its own appearance language, and those who cannot speak it remain forever marked as outsiders regardless of their actual economic achievement. The digital age has intensified rather than diminished these dynamics. Social media creates permanent records of appearance that follow individuals across years and contexts. The photograph from lean times resurfaces during moments of success, reminding audiences of past poverty. Professional networking sites make appearance judgments possible before any meeting occurs. Video calls bring appearance scrutiny directly into homes, requiring maintenance of professional presentation in previously private spaces. Romance and partnership markets operate these same cruel mathematics with particular intensity. Dating profiles get filtered through appearance algorithms before human eyes ever assess them. First dates become appearance auditions where clothing quality signals resource availability. The partner who appears poor faces constant testing of their worthiness, required to prove value through other metrics that those who appear wealthy never need demonstrate. Love might be blind, but attraction sees everything and judges accordingly. The spectacle of authority reveals itself most clearly in ceremonial spaces, where power performs for audiences. Courtrooms elevate judges above eye level, forcing observers to look upward in unconscious submission. Corporate boardrooms feature massive tables and leather chairs that dwarf human occupants, creating environments where scale itself communicates dominance. These architectural choices are not accidents, but calculated manipulations that use physical space to reinforce hierarchical relationships. The individual who enters such spaces wearing visible poverty has already been diminished by the environment before any words are spoken. Governments understand that legitimacy depends more on appearance than on actual capability. Military parades display weapons that may never see combat, but whose polished surfaces communicate threat effectively. Presidential motorcades stretch for blocks, not because security requires such length, but because spectacle creates an impression of importance that translates into actual power. The official who appears in modest circumstances loses authority regardless of their legal position. Citizens obey not the office, but the theater of the office, and that theater demands expensive costumes. The protection that appearance provides against betrayal follows predictable patterns. Those who project prosperity find that potential betrayers hesitate, calculating whether their target might have hidden resources for retaliation. The appearance of wealth suggests connections, suggests lawyers, suggests the ability to make betrayal costly. Meanwhile, those who appear poor invite exploitation precisely because they seem to lack recourse. The employee who looks impoverished can be cheated on wages with less fear of legal action. The tenant who appears struggling can be subjected to illegal conditions with confidence they cannot afford to fight back. Abandonment follows similar logic. Friends, lovers, and allies make unconscious calculations about the cost and benefit of maintaining relationships. The person who appears successful offers potential future value through their networks and resources. The person who appears poor represents drain without compensatory benefit. These calculations rarely reach conscious awareness, but drive behavior nonetheless. A friend who stops returning calls after witnessing financial struggle is not making a deliberate choice to be cruel, but following unconscious programming that associates poverty with social risk. Negotiations reveal the gap between actual and perceived resources most starkly. The seller who appears desperate accepts lower prices regardless of their actual alternatives. The buyer who appears wealthy pays premium prices even when their budget is limited. The employee who looks financially stressed receives smaller raises because employers assume they will accept less. The contractor who projects prosperity commands higher fees for identical work. These dynamics play out millions of times daily, transferring wealth from those who look poor to those who look rich, independent of actual financial positions. The contempt directed toward visible poverty has roots in existential terror. Every human knows their own economic vulnerability, the thin margins that separate stability from catastrophe. Witnessing poverty triggers this awareness, forcing confrontation with possibilities most prefer to deny. Rather than acknowledge this fear, the mind transforms it into disgust, creating emotional distance from the reminder of potential downfall. The homeless person becomes not a human experiencing misfortune, but a warning to be avoided. The colleague in obvious financial stress becomes not a peer needing support, but a contagion requiring quarantine. This fear-based contempt creates social isolation that deepens economic struggles. The person who appears poor finds themselves excluded from informal networks where opportunities circulate. The after-work drinks where promotions get discussed, the weekend gatherings where business partnerships form, the casual conversations where crucial information gets shared, all become inaccessible to those whose appearance marks them as economically other. This isolation is not official policy, but emerges from thousands of small decisions by individuals who unconsciously avoid association with visible poverty. The cycle of limitation becomes self-reinforcing through feedback loops that are nearly impossible to break. Limited resources prevent investment in appearance. Poor appearance limits access to opportunities. Limited opportunities prevent resource accumulation. Each revolution of this cycle makes the next harder to interrupt. The individual caught within it faces not a single barrier, but an interconnected system of exclusions that multiply each other as effects. Children absorb these dynamics through observation, learning before they can speak that appearance determines treatment. They witness how adults respond differently to well-dressed strangers versus shabby ones. They internalize hierarchies based on clothing quality in school settings. They learn to assess peers through material markers before developing conscious awareness of what they are doing. By adulthood, these patterns have become so deeply embedded that they feel like natural law rather than learned behavior. The workplace becomes a particularly cruel arena for appearance-based discrimination because it combines economic necessity with social judgment. The employee, who cannot afford the unofficial uniform of their workplace, faces daily microaggressions that accumulate into macroeconomic consequences. Comments about outfit repetition, exclusion from client meetings due to appearance concerns, assumptions about competence based on clothing quality. Each incident seems minor in isolation, but collectively creates an environment where advancement becomes impossible regardless of performance. The digital transformation of work has created new appearance pressures rather than eliminating them. Video calls bring professional scrutiny into personal spaces, requiring not just appropriate clothing, but appropriate backgrounds. The home office that reveals economic struggle through visible surroundings undermines professional credibility as effectively as shabby clothing once did. The investment required to maintain professional appearance has expanded from wardrobe to living space, multiplying the burden on those with limited resources. Educational environments demonstrate how early appearance disadvantage compounds over time. The student whose poverty is visible through clothing and supplies receives less attention from teachers, lower expectations, fewer opportunities for advancement. These early differentials in treatment create achievement gaps that widen with each passing year. By graduation, students who began with equal capability but different appearance resources show dramatically different outcomes, not because of intelligence or effort, but because of how appearance shaped the responses they received from educational systems. The transformation from appearance to reality follows patterns that successful manipulators of perception have understood throughout history. They begin with small gestures carefully calculated to project prosperity beyond their means. A watch purchased on payment plans, but worn to every important meeting. A single high-quality suit maintained obsessively while everything else remains threadbare. These focal points of false wealth draw attention away from the larger picture of economic struggle, creating impressions that become foundations for actual opportunity. The borrowed finery strategy has lifted countless individuals from genuine poverty to actual wealth. They rent luxury cars for important meetings, understanding that the impression created in those minutes matters more than the cost. They arrange meetings in hotel lobbies they cannot afford to stay in, leveraging the ambiance of wealth without its substance. They join clubs through trial memberships or guest passes, inserting themselves into networks where opportunity circulates. Each deception builds toward reality as connections made through false pretenses generate real possibilities. Successful practitioners of appearance manipulation understand timing and context. They appear wealthy where it matters, at professional events, during negotiations, in spaces where decisions get made, while living austerely in private. They eat sparse meals alone to afford impressive dinners with valuable contacts. They walk miles to save transportation costs that get redirected into appearance investments. This is not comfortable living, but strategic suffering, accepting private hardship to create public perception that eventually eliminates the need for such sacrifice. The distinction between vanity and strategic appearance investment becomes clear through outcomes. Vanity seeks admiration for its own sake, spending resources on display that generates no return beyond temporary satisfaction. Strategic investment targets specific appearances that open specific doors. The entrepreneur who cannot afford office space but rents a prestigious mailing address understands that correspondence on impressive letterhead generates more responses than honest admission of working from a kitchen table. The consultant who maintains one expensive outfit for pitches while wearing thrift store clothing otherwise knows that first impressions determine whether expertise gets heard. Breaking poverty cycles through image management requires sustained performance that borders on method acting. The individual must inhabit the character of success so thoroughly that even they begin believing it. This psychological transformation is crucial because authentic confidence reads differently than nervous pretense. Body language shifts when someone truly believes they belong in spaces of power. Voice modulation changes when speaking from assumed authority rather than hoped-for acceptance. These subtle differences register in observers' unconscious assessments, determining whether the performance succeeds or fails. The risk inherent in appearance investment creates a particular form of entrepreneurship. Every dollar spent on image could have gone toward basic needs, making each choice a gamble on future returns. The shoes that cost a week's food budget might enable the meeting that changes everything, or they might simply leave their owner hungry with nice footwear. This uncertainty requires not just courage but calculation, assessing which appearance investments offer highest probability of return while managing the downside risk of basic survival. Historical examples demonstrate repeatedly how illusion crystallizes into reality when maintained long enough. The impoverished aristocrat, who maintains noble bearing despite empty coffers, attracts investors who assume hidden wealth. The struggling artist who presents themselves as already successful draws patrons who want association with perceived talent. The entrepreneur who acts as though their venture is thriving attracts partners and customers who create the reality that was initially pretense. In each case, sustained performance of success generates actual success through the responses it triggers in others. The psychological toll of maintaining false prosperity while experiencing real poverty creates unique pressures. The individual must compartmentalize completely, never allowing private struggle to contaminate public performance. They cannot confide in new connections made through deception, as admission would destroy the foundation of those relationships. They must maintain exhausting vigilance, ensuring no detail betrays the reality behind the mask. This cognitive load compounds the existing stress of economic hardship, creating conditions that break many before they achieve the transformation they seek. Modern technology has created new tools for appearance manipulation that previous generations could not access. Digital photography allows careful curation of images that suggest lifestyles far beyond actual means. Social media enables construction of narratives that emphasize peaks while hiding valleys. Virtual meetings allow backgrounds that suggest success regardless of actual surroundings. These tools democratize deception in ways that make image management both easier and more necessary, as everyone now competes in the same arena of manufactured perception. The moment when illusion becomes reality rarely announces itself dramatically. Instead, opportunities emerge gradually from the network effects of sustained performance. The contact made at an event attended in borrowed clothes introduces someone else who offers genuine opportunity. The confidence developed through performing success translates into actual capability. The habits formed while pretending prosperity speaking with authority, moving through spaces with ownership, expecting positive responses, become genuine traits that generate their own momentum. The ethical dimensions of strategic deception create philosophical tensions that each practitioner must resolve individually. Is it wrong to project false wealth to escape poverty? Does deceiving others about resources become justified if it leads to mutual benefit? These questions have no universal answers. only individual calculations about survival versus integrity. Many who successfully transition from perform to actual prosperity later struggle with imposter syndrome, feeling their success is somehow illegitimate because it began with deception. The systemic nature of appearance-based discrimination means individual solutions cannot address the full problem. Each person who successfully manipulates their image to escape poverty leaves behind thousands who cannot manage the same performance. The energy required to maintain appearance, while poor, represents a tax on poverty itself, draining resources that could otherwise enable advancement through other means. Yet until systems change, individuals must navigate reality as it exists rather than as it should be. The ultimate mastery involves making the mask so perfectly fitted that removing it becomes impossible. Those who begin by pretending wealth must eventually become wealthy enough that the pretense transforms into truth, or risk exposure that destroys everything built on false foundations. This transition requires not just achieving economic success, but psychological integration of the identity that began as performance. The individual must become who they pretended to be so thoroughly that even they forget it began as artifice.